For weeks and weeks, they'd been arguing about it. Now it's happened. Benjamin Netanyahu addressing the U.S. Congress 2 weeks before Israel's general election at the invitation of the Republicans. As we were saying in part one of the debate, there was this olive branch given to the Democrats, thanking America, both sides of the aisle, for helping out, standing by Israel through thick and thin, before Netanyahu basically stuck to script and went through his talking points of why the deal could be a danger, not just for the region, but for the entire planet. With us to talk about it, we welcome back Michael Cohen, who is columnist for the Boston Globe and the author of Live from the Campaign Trail. In Idaho Falls, Stephen Yates, chair of the Iowa Republican Party, and a former White House National Security Advisor under George W. Bush. From Washington, Tom Kalina, Policy Director at Plowshares Fund. And here in our studios, Glenn Feder of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, formerly of the Israel Project. Thank you again for being with us. Ahead of the speech, a group of more than 100 retired Israeli army officers and intelligence officials staged a press conference to denounce the Beltway barnstorming that was to come.
The problem is the way he thinks and not Netanyahu's personality. The entire Israeli right simply needs to change its perception of the issues. They need to adapt to the changes that took place in recent years.
What's your reaction, Glenn Feder, to that press conference that was given by those retired officers?
Well, I think, firstly, it's proof that this wasn't just about partisan politics, because there was a division within Israeli society at the very highest level and within the public over this speech. So this isn't necessarily just to win an election. So I really reject that. But yeah, I mean, there are certain former, especially many of them were former intelligence officials who were against this. They called it a grenade within the process. I disagree. I think it was a necessary speech. I think we should leave, with all due respect, I think we should leave politics for the politicians, and that Netanyahu has a very good grasp.
But one of their main fears is that by accepting this invitation that was done behind the back of the White House, that from now on, Israel could become one of those partisan issues that's a lightning rod in Washington.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it was really done behind the back of the White House. I know this is a very contentious issue, but remember, the New York Times published an amendment to the initial story which they broke, that he didn't ask Obama, and they said that actually he did. So there was that controversy. I think that the Obama administration, in a sense, sabotaged this speech because of partisan issues and because of perhaps some ideological differences as well.
Tom Kalina, do you agree?
No. My understanding is that the speech was set up without the White House's knowledge and even without the Democrats in Congress's knowledge. And it's unfortunate because it gives it clearly a partisan tinge to it. And the fact that it's right before the election leaves us asking the question, was this really about Iran policy, or is this really about Netanyahu's effort in his own election? And was it really about Republicans here in Congress trying to score points against Obama? Both of those conversations really should not be had in the context of the real debate, which is what the right thing to do about Iran's nuclear program is. And frankly, it's serving a distraction. You know, the real issues are what's happening in Europe with the negotiations between the P5+1 and Iran, and what is Congress here going to do as they consider essentially blowing up the talks with legislation that they're considering.
And will this change the conversation on Capitol Hill? There was always this broad consensus when it came to Israel. Could there be a lasting impact from the fact that, you know, Vice President Joe Biden went off to Guatemala and didn't attend, and all the some high-powered lawmakers from the Democratic side?
I think the lasting impact is that Republicans in Congress will be emboldened to do something to stop the Iran deal, unfortunately, because I think the deal that's currently being considered is a good deal, and we shouldn't be sacrificing it again for a dangerous illusion of Netanyahu's. And so if Republicans are emboldened by this and try to put additional sanctions on Iran, or vote to have an up or down vote on the deal in Congress, it could very well doom the negotiations before they even reach fruition.
Stephen Yates, do you agree this will embolden Republicans?
Well, I really don't think that's what the narrative is coming out of this. I mean, really, if you just look at some basic numbers that are really undeniable, if you had a piece of legislation that was supported by all Republicans and 2/3 of Democrats, you would say that's overwhelmingly bipartisan support. If you look at past joint sessions where we have a head of state come and address that body, a lot of times you have to call around to interns to make sure you even fill the body. This was attended by many senators and many current office holders. And so this was a more serious event than just simple partisan politics.
But going forward, Stephen Yates,
Yates,
going forward, will Republicans be emboldened, and will they be more emboldened to eventually scuttle a deal?
Well, Republicans, by and large, were skeptical of where this deal is going. If for no other reason, look at where all the other administration foreign policy negotiations have been. Have we had a success in Libya? Have we had a success in Syria? Have we had a success with Russia, Ukraine? I mean, really, just from not just a partisan point of view, but just an analytical point of view, the administration doesn't have a lot out there to give people confidence that it's going to get a good deal on a pressing national security issue.
All right, lots of reactions coming in from viewers. One from Solomon on Twitter. There's no gamble or intention to annoy anyone, but to warn of the danger in the making. Michael Cohen, what's the lasting impact of this speech going to be?
I think the lasting impact will be known in 2 weeks from today when Israelis go to the polls. I do not think it's going to have a huge impact on the Iran negotiations. I think if there's a deal worked out between the U.S. and its allies and Iran, that deal will almost certainly be implemented. I think it'll have the support of enough Democrats in Congress. I don't think you'll see more sanctions legislation being passed. If there's no deal, I think the administration may even be supportive of sanction legislation as a way of putting increasing pressure on Iran. I just don't think it's going to have a huge impact on the Iran debate per se. I mean, where it may even have an impact, I think it may make Democrats in Congress a little wary of possibly going along with the sanctions bill in order to be seen as going against the president. But at this point, I think we'll know what's going to happen as far as the election in 2 weeks, and then after that, we'll hopefully know what happens with the Iran discussions.
So it's going to crystallize both camps, Democrats and Republicans?
Well, Republicans were going to be opposed to a deal no matter what, and we're trying to scuttle a deal no matter what. That was never in question. The issue really was, where do Democrats come down on this? Are they going to support sanction legislation, or are they going to support the president? And so far, they support the president. I mean, this debate began about 2 months ago, a little less than that actually in Congress, with Democratic senators basically saying we're going to wait and see what happens with negotiations. Now, of course, one issue that will come up is how does Congress respond to a deal? Will Democrats be supportive of it? I think that certainly will be an interesting question, and Congress will make an effort even after this deal to kill it, or certainly to prevent sanctions from being lifted. But that's a couple of years down the road if there is a deal. I mean, there are steps that the president can take initially on his own to lift sanctions. So I think Congress's role in this, at least in the near term, is not. If there's a deal, is not necessarily that significant. If there's not a deal, then you have certainly, I think, playing a bigger role. But again, even there, I think if there's no deal, you may see the administration actually even somewhat supportive of sanctions, if only just to relieve some of the pressure that you're going to get from Congress.
All right, Michael Cohen pointing out that we'll know the short-term impact in 2 weeks' time. So far, the Israeli elections proving to be once again another nail-biter, a latest poll putting an opposition center-left coalition on 24 seats, one better than Netanyahu's Likud, too close to call. And either way, whoever wins will, of course, have to build a coalition. There you see all the various colors of the rainbow in the various groups there that are going to make up the winner. Glenn Feder, our correspondent in Jerusalem, Gallagher Fenwick, telling us that the initial reaction was this is not going to impact voters much in Israel.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it has an impact in the sense that that everyone was watching this in Israel, but ultimately I don't think it's going to change people in Labor to vote for Likud, or people in Likud to vote for Labor. I do think that ultimately this was a symbolic speech, and that it's not. I mean, this election is not going to be decided based on this speech. Like you said, it's a nail biter, and it's very hard to say where it's going to go. I think that Bibi has a slight lead, but that could change as well.
All right. The other issue, of course, and we've been talking about it all along, is what happens when it comes to those nuclear negotiations. John Kerry and his Iranian counterpart, Mr. Zarif, in Montreux on the banks of Lake Geneva this very Tuesday. They're coming up against a deadline at the end of the month for a provisional deal. One of the big sticking points in those negotiations, according to the UN's nuclear watchdog, is Tehran's refusal to address allegations that in the past it tried to get the bomb.
If Iran says that the allegations are not correct, the best way is to engage with us. We have asked questions, and we are ready to discuss this issue, and we very much welcome the clarification efforts by them. But not engaging with us is not a solution.
Tom Kalina, from what it sounds like, the Iranians driving a hard bargain. How will today's events affect or not affect those negotiations?
Again, I think they're a distraction from the real venue, which is the negotiations on Lake Geneva, as you mentioned. We're coming down to the wire. We have about 2 or 3 weeks now before this interim deadline of needing to reach a framework agreement on the broad outline of the deal by the end of March. And so that progress is key, and the key to that really is that Congress here in Washington not do anything that could torpedo that process. So, for example, Congress passing legislation that would give Congress a specific vote up or down on the Iran deal should be avoided, because that could cast a negative pall over the negotiations on Lake Geneva.
Could cast a negative pall over the negotiations on Lake Geneva. In her speech before AIPAC, Obama's national security advisor, Susan Rice, turning the heat not on Netanyahu, but you heard Tom Kalina there, on the Republican-led Congress. Here's what she had to say.
Congress has played a hugely important role in helping to build our sanctions on Iran. But they shouldn't play the spoiler now. Additional sanctions or restrictive legislation enacted during the negotiation would blow up the talks, divide the international community, and cause the United States to be blamed for the failure to reach a deal. Meanwhile, the Iranians are well aware that if they walk away from a deal, Congress will pass new sanctions immediately, and President Obama will support them.
All right, Stephen Yates, in the end, there were worries, you remember, that Netanyahu might give away some secrets. It was John Kerry who sort of indirectly expressed that worry yesterday. In the end, will the Republicans play ball with the Obama White House while he negotiates?
Well, a lot of us have seen this movie before. I mean, this idea that you can't have legislatures playing activist roles during negotiations, or the world will end, or even the negotiations will end, is just belied by the history of these decades-long negotiations on nuclear issues. Accountability and verification are always exceedingly difficult and almost unattainable in these negotiations. So you get agreements that are broken, deadlines get set, and they move. And even this current round of Iran negotiations, we've dealt with slippery deadlines, and this upcoming one probably will be similar. So you're going to have a legislature no matter who's in charge. And one of the people that spoke out immediately after the speech was Senator Feinstein, saying that she's still skeptical about the deal, not a partisan Republican. And so this is what legislatures do in their oversight role and trying to push for better terms on the actual deal. So I expect them to continue that.
At what point do you give the negotiations a chance, and then at what point do you decide, let's step up sanctions?
Well, there's only one commander-in-chief at a time, and so every president basically has the burden of basically making his deal. And you take your deal and you bring it to the body, and then they comb over it. And yes, they'll comb over what they think it's going to be in advance and foreshadow things, but it's definitely true that he's got to make the deal and then bring it to them for the debate after the fact, because really it's not going to be sustainable unless there's buy-in by the Senate leadership at least.
Tom Kalina, how are the negotiations going so far in your view?
Well, what we're told is that the progress has been very good and the deal is within sight if the political will is there on both sides to make it happen. The complicating factor is that there are critics of the deal on both sides, both here in Washington and also in Iran, that are arguing hardline policies and not to make compromises and all the rest. You know, as we all know, negotiations are about compromises, and ultimately both sides have to decide, am I better off with this deal or without this deal? And so I think what we need to do is give the negotiators the space that they need to get the best deal that they can, and then there'll be room for Congress to weigh in to decide how they feel about it. But they shouldn't be acting now.
Michael Cohen, what's your prediction if at the end of the month there's white smoke and that provisional deal between what the so-called P5+1 and Iran?
Will there be a deal?
No. What will be the reaction in Washington if there is a deal?
I mean, I think Republicans will oppose it no matter what is in the deal. I think Democrats will sort of wait and see what some of the details are. I think it's hard to say until you know the specifics about what the reactions are going to be. I would say that I don't think you're going to get a deal by the end of March. I think at best you're going to get a framework agreement toward a deal. But I think there has to be some progress at some point this month, or I think Congress is going to say enough is enough. We've already missed 2 deadlines. A third one would, I think, would be pretty bad. To have that occur. I mean, one thing I think that is important to mention that Netanyahu did not mention today is that the interim agreement that was signed in the fall of 2013, the Iranians have adhered to it. There's no evidence they've broken that agreement. So I think, so far at least, the specifics of what's happened since the two sides came together has been relative progress. You've seen Iranians agreeing to the conditions of the interim agreement. You've seen some sanctions relief. So I think there's been some confidence has been at least built in the two sides. Whether a deal is possible, I don't know. And I think no one knows that answer for sure. But I wouldn't necessarily assume, as your earlier person suggested, that we can't achieve a deal with the Iranians. I think there is a deal out there that's possible. It just may take a while for us to get there.
Point taken, Glenn Feder?
I disagree. I don't think the Iranians have been following the agreements. We just saw that the IAEA said that they're not being transparent for the past, since 2006. 6 resolutions were passed, which they've been thumbing their nose at. And I think they've been, for the past 16 years, have been playing a game of cat and mouse with the IAEA. And we have to, I think ultimately we have to look at the end game. What is the end game if we want to understand the deal? And I think the end game for Iran is ultimately to enrich uranium and create a nuclear weapon. That is their end game. They could buy time through a deal, but that's all it will be, a kind of hudna. It will be a kind of treaty, a temporary treaty, but it won't be a permanent deal. And that's why there's a sunset clause in the deal where basically it phases out.
All right, Michael Cohen?
Point out that what I said was the interim agreement signed in the fall of 2013, the Iranians have adhered to. That is a fact, and I believe even the Israelis have agreed to that. And one point that I think is important to make is one of your earlier someone mentioned that you can't have verification on these kind of deals. That's simply not true. We signed lots of deals with the Soviet Union and Russia after the end of the Cold War on nuclear agreements with them that included pretty intensive verification and monitoring that have been adhered to. And the thing about the deal, everyone talks about the sunset clause, if you get a deal with the Iranians, it will include invasive monitoring of Iran's nuclear program. Okay? It's not just as if that all of a sudden after 10 or 15 years that's going to end. That will continue. Whether the Iranians can enrich uranium is an issue to be negotiated. But the idea that all of a sudden all bets are off once you've hit 10 or 15 years down the road is simply not true. And we have lots of tools at our disposal to verify that the Iranians are adhering to the agreements that they have made. That's what the IAEA is for. Okay. That's what national inspectors are for. So I just want to be clear on that point, that there's no reason to believe that because Iran signs a deal, they're going to break it 15 years from now.
Do you trust that ultimately they do not want to build a nuclear weapon? Do you think that is true? That statement is true?
I don't know what their intentions are. Their intentions may be that they want to be a threshold power.
They've made their intentions pretty clear, I think, with the statements. With their statements, I think they've made their intentions very clear.
But you think that, and I don't agree. I think that it's not clear what they want. They may want to be a nuclear power that is just short of having a nuclear weapon as a threshold power. A country like Japan, for example.
When Rouhani tweeted that Israel should be wiped off the map, and when Ahmadinejad before that said boldly and clearly that Israel should be wiped off the face of the earth, I'm not sure exactly how else to interpret that. I think that's pretty
I told
clear.
you what my interpretation is. Whether Iran's nuclear power is an issue that no one knows the answer to. They have certainly developed nuclear capability. Certainly, one can argue that they want to have a nuclear bomb. I would make the case they may very well intend to want to be a threshold power, which means they want to be on the.
Can we afford to trust that they're bluffing? I think that's the question.
All right, there's been a few reactions from the U.S. president himself. Barack Obama saying there was nothing new, quote, in the speech by Benjamin Netanyahu. He says a deal with Iran would cut off different pathways for it to obtain weapons and roll back parts of its program. Finally, Obama saying that without a deal, Iran will be on a much faster track to getting the bomb. Stephen Yates, your reaction?
Well, it's just dealing with the contours of a debate that's gone on for a very long time. Obviously, if these deals accomplished all that is promised when you make them, then Iran wouldn't have the number of centrifuges it has spinning today. If verification was an easy thing, it's not that there is no verification, it's just that verification is always the hardest part of these negotiations, and it's the most contentious thing after an agreement is made. It's also been something we've lived with in the broader Middle East multiple times. So there's no illusion that this is an easy thing. It's a very hard thing. But there's no way we can say that we're on a trajectory where Iran has made clear it's made a strategic choice to seek peace with its neighbors, made a strategic choice to stay away from the pursuit of these ultimate weapons. And so I think that there is reason to have doubt about their intentions in these negotiations.
All right, final word, Tom Kalina, do you share those doubts?
Well, it's not about trust. We have an agreement with inspections and verifications so that we don't have to trust Iran. I think it's very reasonable not to trust Iran. That's why we have inspections. That's why we have verification. We will have more inspections and better verification with the deal that's being put together than without it. That's just yet another reason why we need to pursue this deal and get it if we can.
Tom Kalina, I want to thank you for joining us from Washington. Stephen Yates from Idaho Falls. Michael Cohen from New York. I also want to thank as well Glenn Feder for being with us. Stay with us because our Media Watch segment is next. Hello, James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. So a lot of reaction, as you can imagine, on social media in the US and elsewhere to the speech to Congress. You have media and just regular citizens reacting. A deal doesn't block Iran's path to the bomb. It paves it. So various quotes from Benjamin Netanyahu making their way onto media's Twitter feeds. Some saying that this is getting, the Bibi speech is getting a lot of noise, and it's not as if his Iran policy is a secret, says Rula Khalaf, nor will it change the course of diplomacy. So I guess it was a case of him stating what is already very clear from in policy terms. Several journalists criticising, of course, which has been the big discussion over the last number of weeks, the fact that this wasn't okayed by the executive in the US, and Max Fisher of Vox.com saying that John Boehner is undermining not just Obama's policies but his very leadership of US foreign policy. So those opinions which have been stated again and again over the last number of weeks, of course, being restated today. The same journalist saying, of course, historical comparisons were drawn with the Holocaust, etc., but also with the Iraq invasion, and a speech that Mr. Netanyahu made to Congress in 2002 saying, if you take out Saddam, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. That was brought out. Of course, often this is the case. Unfortunate statements that were made in the past are trotted out to discredit current statements. So I think that's what's happening there. Some support for Benjamin Netanyahu in several tweets as well. Thank you, Barack Obama, for not tainting the historical Netanyahu speech with a single member of your joke of an administration. So clearly not a fan of Barack Obama there. I picture Obama with his fingers in his ears saying la 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 all the way through the speech so he wouldn't have to hear the truth, according to Samantha. Now, elsewhere, you had obviously critical opinions as well, one expressed by Amnesty International saying no mention of Jewish-only settlements by forcing Palestinians out of their homes. So that's Amnesty International's well-known anti-settlement position being restated on their Twitter feed. What else do we have? Of course, then, internal Israeli politics. That's getting quite a lot of comment as well. And several people making the remark that the US Republican Party is perhaps acting in favour of Benjamin Netanyahu's campaign here. And are there disclaimers in their campaign ads? This person quips. And
there's been a lot of talk about, most notably, Sheldon Adelson, the billionaire casino mogul, who's been bankrolling both the Republicans and Netanyahu.
Right, indeed. But actually tempering those remarks is the fact that Israeli television did ban the speech live on Israeli TV. So rules similar to the ones you have in France in pre-election periods where on-air time has to be measured out. And polls as well, of course, testing the American public opinion. And it appears, according to CNN, 30% in favour of the speech, 48% against.
All right, those snap polls, perhaps we need to check on the math on some of them.
Hard to get the temperature completely accurate.
Exactly. James Creedon.
Thanks, Francois.
All there with the immediate reactions.
Yes.
I want to thank again our panel. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.